spent 13 years of my life doing this work, right? And I still don't quite have the strains I want. And I don't want to be skipped over for 21-year-old kids that want to have a great time at a concert. Next one is taxation. Now, at Americans for Safe Access, we don't believe that any medicine should be taxed, right? As a political position, that's where we stand. Now, we've had to definitely work within what's the reality of the state. The state of California, over-the-counter drugs are taxed. There's a sales tax on them, right? And cannabis, while it's not quite an over-the-counter drug, it's more like some specific over-the-counter drugs, right? But we're not in pharmacies, right? So, and we don't want our medicine in pharmacies. So it makes sense that in the state of California we would have a sales tax, right, for this medicine. Any tax beyond that does not make sense, right? It is the fact that I have the medical condition I have is not a sin, right? And the medicine I have to take is not a sin either. And I do not want patients to be subjected to sin taxes. I mean, you know, sin taxes are on alcohol, gambling, and tobacco are what politicians look at every time there's a hole in the budget, right? That's why cigarettes in New York City are $14 a pack right now. And that's fine for sin, right? Because people are making choices to gamble. They're choosing to drink alcohol. They're choosing to smoke cigarettes because it makes their life better. Cigarette smokers there. I did not really endorse cigarette smoking. Did you guys order a cup of whipped cream? That's awesome. That's really awesome. So we have to make sure that we're not put in that same category, right, as consumers, right? We have to be looking at the difference between want and need. The other major difference is the amount of cannabis we consume, right? The average recreational cannabis consumer outside of Northern California, just be clear, uses about an eighth a month, right? Uses about an eighth a month. So the regulations around that amount of marijuana is very different than our population, and many of us are using an eighth a day in the medication we use, right? So we can't, like what we're going to need from our cultivators, what we're going to need from our manufacturers, and what we're going to need for laws that dictate the amount we can have, it's very different than recreational. Make sense? Right? So yes, it's the same plant, right? But we all have a lot of different needs from this plant. And as a medical cannabis advocate, I'm excited anytime that this country makes a decision to stop putting people in prison for anything, right? And I'm excited to see those who've actually kind of been hanging around the medical cannabis world because they really wanted legalization. I'm excited that they actually have a place to put their energy, right, and put their focus. That isn't about what we're doing, right? But they're very different. And so, in California, you guys know, we've been hearing about all of these different initiatives. I know of these 3 groups that are drafting initiatives. Who knows where we're going to end up, right, with that process. We are engaged with most people. We are weighing in. We've never actually come out against a legalization measure, and we'll never come out for one. It's not the mission of our organization. We only focus on medical. But if a bill is going to harm patients, right, that would be the only reason we'd actually come out against it, right? So if there's something that's on the ballot that isn't going to harm patients, and you haven't heard us endorse it, right, but you haven't heard us come out against it, then it's probably going to be okay. But what I don't want to be dealing with in 2017, right, is trying to save medical cannabis in the face of a recreational market. Right? One other thing I just want to tell you about some of our opponents in Washington. You know, we've always had law enforcement as a major opponent, right? Like forever. They've always been, in some places, less of an opponent than others. But the one nice thing about having law enforcement be your major opponent is they actually have a limited budget, right? And that's actually been one of our saving graces with medical cannabis, is that periods of time where they actually couldn't shut us all down, right? Like they had limited resources. In Washington, where you have these new recreational stores that are run by private companies, they don't have limited resources, right? And they're hiring private detectives to go into medical cannabis dispensaries and try to get in there without a card and buy as much, right? These are private companies that are doing this. That's frightening, right? And I don't want us to be dealing with that here in California. So what this means is that we need to pass statewide legislation this year. We need to use 2016 as a time to implement the law, right? Really make sure that we have a strong medical cannabis industry in the state of California. So that in 2017, and hopefully they are, I was going to say when and if they're implementing the recreational bill, they're doing it separate from us, right? And they're not trying to figure out how to take things from us, right? They can use all of our product safety information, amazing, but it's going to be a separate system, right? And when elected officials think about sin tax, they're going to be looking at them and not us, right? When they're looking at civil protections, right, they're going to be looking at the two different groups as separate groups. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So let's talk about making sausage. Passing legislation, right, same thing. So there's already several proposals that have been introduced here in Sacramento, and there will be more. We are not going to go today into the details of any of those legislative proposals. Yay! What we're going to do instead is actually talk a little bit about the process. And then we're going to, what I've been doing on this trip is actually seeing where our members are based on points of unity, right? So we have got a couple pieces of legislation introduced. There's more that's going to be introduced, right? You know that. It's way too early to oppose anything, any piece of legislation. And I know how much people love opposing legislation, right? It's much easier to say yes or no, right? Because then you're clear. But that's not the way this works. The way this works is that we have to instead leave words like hate and love at the front door, right? If you don't love a piece of legislation, a piece of paper, leave those at the front door and instead be thoughtful, look at these proposals and be able to articulate, not because it was proposed by someone you don't like, but really look at the language and say, this is what is not going to work for me as a patient. Right? That's what's going to be helpful in this process. And again, we're going to start off with bills that look amazing. We're going to start off with bills that look horrible. But the process is that we're going to be going into offices and saying, oppose this bill unless you change these things. Right? And we're going to be in constant dialogue. And I think last year people got really confused by that process. They're like, I can't believe ACE is even engaging in this. Well, guess who was at the table? Guess who got 15 things that we asked for out of 17 amended in language? That's how it works, right? It works that you're constantly there, right? You're constantly bringing solutions, right? And we're not going to win everything, right? But this year, the luxury that you do not have as medical cannabis advocates is that we can put this off for another year, right? So when something comes across your desk, and your first reaction is, I love it, I hate it. Put that out of your mind, put on the critical thinking cap, and say, these are the things that really are going to work for patients, right? These are the things that are not going to work for patients. Does that make sense? And when you're getting emails from Don over the next few months, right? He's saying, contact your legislators right now. I know Don loves sending emails. It's not just for his health. Like your elected officials really need to hear from their constituents on these points, right? Don is very articulate. We are blessed to have him here in California representing us, right? He can't represent the whole state, right? Every time we ask you to weigh in, we're not going to waste your time. I promise you that, right? When you see a message from us that says, this is being decided in this committee, read it, weigh in, call your elected officials. And in the interim, What we want our advocates to be doing right now for your elected officials here in Sacramento is call them and tell them you want to see statewide regulations this year. That's all you have to say. You don't have to get into details yet, right? They can ask you which bill you support and say none of them yet. That's fine. That's what I just said today to everybody I met with in the Capitol. None of them yet, right? But just that they know that this issue is important, right? So I know that we all think that everyone is thinking about medical cannabis as much as we do. I just want you guys to all know that is not true. We are freaks and we think about this plant more than anybody else on the planet, right? If you're elected officials, medical cannabis is one item, right, in governing California that they're looking at, right? So have you ever thought about what it takes to govern the state of California? It's have droughts, water issues, transportation issues, right? Federal issues, right? You know, the economy. All of these items are on your desk, right? And I mean, think about this. When you're deciding, we have a long list of things to do, and you're prioritizing them. You have a system, right? When I'm cleaning my house, I have a system, right? Like nobody but me sees that, so I don't have to clean that, right? Or like whatever. And so for elected officials, they're doing the same thing. They're like, transportation, new airport, new building, right? Drought issues, right? And they're like, oh, that person in my district really wants me to work on this forest bill. Okay, I'll keep that one over here, right? And the same thing is true for medical cannabis, right? When they're looking at that stack of things, if they haven't heard from a constituent, guess what they're going to put it? On the I don't care pile, because it's complicated. And it isn't an easy issue to deal with. It's not a clear right thing to do, right? It's complicated. So if you want your elected official to keep medical cannabis on their pile of things to think about, then you have to go ask them to do it, right? It's not because they hate us, they hate this issue. The truth is they're really busy. They're really busy. And if their constituents don't care enough to ask them to look into something, then they really don't have to, right? The framework of democracy means the people who have come here in Sacramento to represent their constituents, that's what they're doing. They're not here to protect every law in the state of California. That's not why they come to Sacramento. They come to Sacramento to represent the interests of their constituents. And if they don't hear from you, right, then they're not going to do it. So, again, important year. I'm going to give some handouts. So, we're going to do a quick exercise that does not include push-ups or crunches.